Ireland now following Greece with its own debt crisis. Yields on the 10-year Irish government bond soaring to near 8% as buyers back away from that market, and the euro falling to its lowest level against the dollar in a week. Well, joining us right now to talk about what happens next, Mark Grant, back with us, Managing Director of Southwest Securities. Weeks ago, he warned us that Ireland was running out of money. Also back with us, John Brynjolfsson, Chief Investment Officer of Armored Wolf and former PIMCO portfolio manager. He says the big winner in this latest crisis is gold, which topped $1,400 an ounce today. So, guys, great to have you here with us. Mark, let's start with you. You've been warning us about Europe and Ireland specifically. Yes. So what's going to happen here?
Ireland is going bankrupt. I mean, that's it. I'll make it very short, simple, sweet. They are running out of money. They've got about maybe 60 days left worth of money. And the issue is going to get down to whether they're going to pay the senior debt of the Irish banks, which they either own or control all of them at this point, or whether the EU is going to put the thumb on them and say, that's enough, let the banks go so that they can save the sovereign debt.
But, Mark, we all remember the day that the EU announced their trillion-dollar rescue plan here. Is any of that money going to be put to use ever, or was that just sort of an idea?
I think it was a sham. I'll be even stronger than an idea. It was not a real concept. They put in place a funding mechanism. They actually put some money in that to pay the debts of Greece. They never funded the funding mechanism. After that took place, what happened is that the EU said, well, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to use the taxpayers' money anymore. So what are we going to do? We're going to get it from the bondholders. So the finance minister of Germany was just out today proposing a two-tiered plan where there was an extension in bond maturities in the first go-round if there was a solvency issue, and in the second go-round, a totally restructuring of sovereign debt, which is on the shoulders of bondholders, not on the shoulders of the European Union anymore.
John?
The whole thing is gone.
Well, John, you think the European Central Bank is going to let Europe go down? Not Europe, excuse me, Ireland go down?
Well, I'd be foolish to disagree with Mark about just about anything, and he and I are in agreement on this one, which is that the Irish situation is worse than what we certainly thought, weeks ago, and it's getting worse. But I think the problem's bigger than just Ireland. I think it's an ECB problem. The ECB lends money to Irish banks through the deposit market. It takes in collateral from Ireland, and frankly, I think the phrase all for one and one for all applies to Europe. We're looking at a European situation, and the weak point in that calculus is the euro. So the euro has been falling on this news, and I think that ultimately will be where the brunt of the sell-off occurs.
Let me ask you, though, John, one question before we get into investment possibilities here. Why would the finance minister of Germany come out and say the bondholders need to take a haircut? I mean, aren't these governments concerned about the banks in these countries which tend to hold almost all of this sovereign debt? I mean, NRW, Deutsche Bank, BNP Paribas, SocGen, they all hold a ton of European sovereign debt, right? So why aren't their finance ministers standing up for them?
Well, absolutely. All politics ultimately is local, and there's a huge amount of political tension. We see it here in the U.S. between these bailouts or not. But ultimately, the ECB is somewhat immune from politics, given its independence. And while the politicians are talking tough rhetoric, the ECB behind the scenes is providing liquidity. And as I'd suggest, ultimately they're going to have rates lower for longer, providing the kind of liquidity that we're already accustomed to here in the U.S.
Mark, I'm just looking at kind of the trade that we saw in Europe today, what's going on here in the U.S. It's really kind of a mellow day. Why aren't we seeing more of a reaction, if you will, in the equity side of things?
The equity market, I think, has been very myopic in its viewpoint, only concentrating on America and American numbers and the data coming out of the Fed. And as the problem in Europe exacerbates, my expectation is the stock market in America is going to begin to pay much more attention to it. And I'm not hopeful of higher prices in the American stock market once they start to focus on the very real problems that are going on in Europe right now.
Do you worry, John, as well that this spreads? I mean, is there a real contagion risk here?
Well, what we have is a global sovereign debt deflation or debt delevering cycle going on. The fiscal authorities around the world have their hands tied, and that's why we're seeing so much liquidity provided on the monetary side of the equation. A lot of people are critical of that, but to some extent, like, for example, here in the U.S. and in Europe, inflation is frankly well below target. So I'll start complaining about that liquidity once inflation gets at least to the target levels.
Mark, let me ask you how much policy measures would be helpful here. We saw Kevin Warsh's op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today, and he was saying, look, you can only do so much with monetary action. You need really stronger fiscal policy, and kind of hinted at austerity there. Meanwhile, the Irish are asking, why even bother with austerity if the bank losses are going to drag us down anyway? I mean, does it matter? Does it help?
Well, I mean, the situation in Europe, this is really a European financial crisis, too. As a matter of fact, John and I, who's one of the very bright guys in the world, when it comes to these kinds of things, have discussed it not on your show as friends and colleagues. And what I'm looking for in Europe is a problem that's going to have a severe contagion. It's going to be Ireland, and then it's going to be Portugal, and it may be Spain. We saw the Russian sovereign wealth fund saying they weren't going to buy Spanish debt anymore. One can only suppose there are some very real reasons for this. But the situation in Ireland is even more complicated because since they own all the banks, I think the EU is going to tell them you can't pay the senior bank debt, which is going to be a huge problem for a lot of the British banks and some of the other sovereign institutions that are exposed to their debt.
We got to run. Mark and John, thank you so much.